In 69 BC, having finally subjugated most of Pontus, and leaving a garrison force there to defend the territory, Lucullus continued his invasion of Armenia. King Tigranes, who had refused to extradite King Mithridates, now found himself an enemy of Lucullus. And the Roman commander was ready to make Armenia's king answer for his decision. Lucullus, marching across Armenia, made a beeline for the capital city of Tigranocerta, where King Tigranes was in residence. Though Tigranes did his best to slow Lucullus's progress through the use of his Armenian cataphracts, Lucullus's army cut them to pieces. Seeing that Lucullus would definitely arrive outside the city's 25-meter-high walls, Tigranes left Tigranocerta in the charge of his forces, while he journeyed into the Taurus Mountains in order to recruit a second army, to be used in a surprise attack. Outside the walls of Tigranocerta, Lucullus's siege works failed. The Armenian army repelled the Romans' every attempt to breach the walls, even though they used naphtha, which was a type of napalm. With the use of this flammable liquid, combined with aluminum and magnesium salts, the Battle of Tigranocerta is credited with being the first known battle in history to employ chemical warfare. But Lucullus received help from the citizens of Tigranocerta, who had been forcibly removed from their native lands by King Tigranes in order to fill his, still unfinished, capital city. This displaced population felt no particular loyalty to the Armenian King of Kings, nor to the city in which he forced them to live. So, mounting the city walls, the people shouted warnings to Lucullus's army to expect Tigranes's surprise attack from a second army. When the two armies finally met just southeast of Tigranocerta, several skirmishes involving cataphracts took place. Because Lucullus's army had begun focusing their attacks on the horses' vulnerable legs, Lucullus finally made headway against the heavily armored Armenian cavalry. When the infantry finally clashed during the battle, Lucullus led the charge on foot. As the Armenian cataphracts fell into their own lines, causing disruption and the breaking of formation, the confusion spread throughout the rest of Tigranes's army. In the midst of the chaos, the king took flight with a baggage train, and headed north, while what was left of his broken army was slaughtered by the Romans. The day this battle took place marked the 36th anniversary of Rome's annihilation at Arezzo, which cost Rome approximately 120,000 lives. In 69 BC, the Battle of Tigranocerta helped to make the date of October 16 significantly less inauspicious. With Tigranes in full flight, the happy citizens of Tigranocerta threw open the city gates. The Romans immediately plundered Armenia's capital. Tigranes's treasury, valued at approximately 8,000 talents, or approximately $100 million, was looted by Lucullus who, in turn, paid each of his soldiers an additional bonus. With everything of value taken, Lucullus's army burned Tigranocerta to the ground. Tigranes fled into the northern kingdom of Armenia. There, he began recruiting another army to defend his hereditary capital city of Artaxata. Lucullus, however, turned south, away from Artaxata, and marched towards Parthia's border. Camping on the Parthian border over the winter, Lucullus sent ambassadors into Parthia to request support from their king, Aristes. King Aristes also spent the winter fielding requests for support from Tigranes, who wintered at Artaxata. Unfortunately for both sides, Aristes was too busy defending Parthia from his own enemies to involve his legions in someone else's war. So, in the spring of 68 BC, Lucullus resumed his invasion of Armenia, and began the long and difficult march towards Artaxata. This forced his army through difficult terrain and mountainous regions. Mithridates, still recovering from his defeat by Lucullus, was not in favor of putting their newly conscripted soldiers up against Lucullus's battle-hardened veterans. But Tigranes, seeing full well that Lucullus was headed straight for Artaxata, was not inclined to remain on the offensive. Tigranes sent out his forces, along with Iberian allies he had acquired, hoping to slow Lucullus's march. Near the river Arsanius, at what is referred to as the Battle of Artaxata, Lucullus defeated Tigranes's forces once again. However, Lucullus's journey across Armenia, and the battles they had incurred along the way, had taken much longer than anticipated. This resulted in the end of the short-lived, warm weather, which made crossing Armenia's Lesser Caucasus Mountains much easier. Although Lucullus intended to pursue Tigranes and Mithridates, who had fled again, Lucullus's army mutinied. When the first winter snows fell, his legions refused to go any further. To appease his mutinous army, Lucullus was forced to turn around and march them into the warmer lands of northern Mesopotamia. There, they took the fortress of Nisibis, near modern-day Nuzibin, Turkey, which Lucullus then used as the army's headquarters for the 68-67 BC winter. Once they arrived in the warmer climate, Lucullus had no more trouble from his army. Lucullus himself, however, did not remain in Nisibis for the winter. Taking with him a highly mobile military escort, Lucullus entered Syria, with the intention of removing it from Tigranes' possession. Back in 83 BC, nearing the close of the First Mithridatic War, and Sulla's treaty with Mithridates, Syria's king, Antiochus XII, died. Following his death, Cleopatra Selene, who was a royal princess of the Ptolemaic line, declared her son, Antiochus XIII, as Syria's new king, with herself as co-regent. But the Syrians, and the governor of Damascus, tired of the Syrian civil wars, invited the king of the Nabateans to rule over them. This led to a power struggle which ended in Armenia's king Tigranes invading Syria sometime around 75 or 74 BC. Cleopatra Selene's son, Syria's dispossessed king of the royal Seleucid line, journeyed to Rome with his younger brother. There, they petitioned the Senate to recognize their Ptolemaic lineage, and grant them the thrones of Egypt and Cyprus. This claim was based on the fact that, through their mother, Cleopatra Selene, who was a royal sister of Tigranocerta, they were legitimate descendants of the Ptolemaic line, as well as that of the Seleucids. They argued further that the Ptolemies who had been placed on the thrones of Egypt and Cyprus, at the end of Sulla's dictatorship, were illegitimate, being the offspring of Tigranocerta and his Greek mistress. Antiochus XIII, and his brother, whose name we do not know, brought wealth for buying bribes, and even donated a jeweled candelabrum to the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus. And, even though Cicero tells us that their heritage was common knowledge in Rome, the Senate still refused to hear their petitions for Egypt's thrones. Regrettably, all the bribe money the Seleucid princes, who were in Rome during Lucullus's consulship, had paid, came to nothing. It still served Rome's interests to support Egypt's flute-playing king, his illegitimacy the main reason for his compliance to Rome's wishes. A bastard king, with only half royal blood, and who needed Rome to maintain his throne, was a king Rome could control. And, should Ptolemy Auletes prove otherwise, he was an easier king for Rome to replace than would be a king whose indisputable claim to the throne might provoke Egypt's legions into rising in their defense. As a result, Rome chose to continue supporting her puppet king in Egypt, and the Seleucid princes were sent back to Syria empty-handed. But Lucullus had never forgotten the Seleucid princes. Marching with his mobile unit, Lucullus decided, in the name of the Senate and people of Rome, to officially remove Syria from Armenia's control, and return it to the Seleucids. Elevating Antiochus XIII to the throne, Lucullus named him king of Syria. No longer could Tigranes command Syria to send him troops, supplies, or any other type of assistance for the war he and Mithridates were waging against Rome. Unfortunately for Lucullus, while he was busy in Syria, installing the new king, his brother-in-law was also busy, undermining Lucullus's authority with the legions stationed at Nisibis. Working on behalf of Pompeius Magnus, Publius Claudius continued to cultivate, in the soldiers, feelings of frustration and dissatisfaction over the amount of plunder they had received fighting in such a notoriously wealthy part of the world. Instead of growing more and more wealthy, as they expected campaigns in the east to provide, they were just growing tired. All they did was battle Mithridates, and then chase him to the next battle. Every time they fought, Mithridates fled. Over and over this went on. And now, they were no longer even fighting Mithridates, but had switched, instead, to Tigranes of Armenia, who also fled after his losses. Where was the booty, the gold, the wine, the plunder? The two legions who had been stationed in the east following Sulla's peace treaty ending the First Mithridatic War, were the same two legions who had been under the command of Gaius Flavius Fimbria. They were the legions who, at the instigation of Fimbria himself, had mutinied against their commander, Gaius Valerius Flaccus, resulting in Flaccus's execution. In the end, Fimbria's legions abandoned him to defect to the army of Sulla, who left them in the east, on account of their notorious reputation. Sulla, on his way to deal with the Marians in Rome, could not afford 2 legions who he could not trust. But for Publius Claudius, knowing the Fimbria legion's reputation to easy mutiny, they were perfect. Through their disaffection and mutiny, Lucullus could be discredited. This would make it easier for Publius Claudius's secret benefactor, Pompeius Magnus, to manipulate command away from him. To further embolden the soldiers, Publius Claudius pointed out that, even when they had mutinied in the north, and refused to pursue Tigranes and Mithridates, Lucullus had failed to discipline them. With Publius Claudius instigating the aggressive, and easy to manipulate, Fimbria legions into recruiting others from the army into their rebellion, a full-scale mutiny of Lucullus's legions was just a matter of time.